Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, good evening, wherever you're joining us from. Welcome to this consultative roundtable on the fourth industrial revolution, organized by the African Academy of Sciences. My name is Grace Mwaura, and I'm joined by a fantastic team, which you'll get to meet shortly. At this point, I want to give you a few instructions to enable us to have a smooth webinar. First is to acknowledge the team that is with us, and second is to inform you that you remain muted for the rest of the 2 hours. This is because we are quite a high number, so we're not able to manage all that audio. However, we encourage you to type in your questions using the questions tab, and we'll try to respond to those as much as we can. We also encourage you to post any technical challenges you may have. For example, if we haven't seen your question or you're not hearing us very well, use the chat box to send those messages to us so that we can respond to them. Also, would love to know what institutions you're joining us from. So if you could change your name to have your preferred name and your institution initials, that would be very helpful for us. At this point, I want to welcome our moderator for the day, Wesley, who is going to take us through the rest of the day. Over to you, Wesley.
Thank you, Grace. Greetings to everyone, and a warm welcome to this consultative roundtable on the fourth industrial revolution, hosted by the African Academy of Sciences. I'm Wesley Dosami, and I will be moderating this event. Thank you for joining us and taking the time out of your busy schedules amidst a global crisis to participate in this event. And we gathered around today with our common interest towards shaping a better future for the African continent. I would like to take the opportunity to make some general remarks as a backdrop as we progress towards this, through this engagement. We have entered a new era of socio-economic disruption arising from the fourth industrial revolution, which is characterized by the amalgamation of digital, biological, and physical realms. A key question on the African agenda is how can Africa leverage 4IR for its benefit? 4IR technologies are not a far-off vision for Africa, and we're already playing a key role as Africa transitions into the mainstream global economy. For instance, we're able to assemble here today virtually from all over the world to make our contributions to these discussions. So we are seeing a rapid growth of tech startups and other such exciting developments in Africa's emerging technology landscape. Although there has been some positive movement on the continent with improved human development indices and better regional interactions and economic progress, there are still very deep concerns about the continent potentially missing out on maximizing its growth benefits from 4IR. It is through our recognition of indigenous African knowledge and technology systems, our post-colonial experiences, and Africa's ability to leapfrog technological steps in certain instances, such as demonstrated by the mobile telecommunications boom on the continent, that we can garner optimism and energy to face the task before us. So once again, thank you for joining us, and I look forward to having a productive engagement today. I now have the pleasure of inviting our host, Dr. Isevani Naika of the African Academy of Sciences. Dr. Isevani Naika is the Director of Strategy and Partnerships at the Academy and our host today. Please, Dr. Naika, the floor is yours to address us.
Isavani, kindly unmute yourself.
Okay, great. Apologies. Welcome, dear colleagues, friends, and partners across the continent and across the world, and thank you for joining us for this consultative roundtable on the fourth industrial revolution. This follows a series of roundtables that we've had, some of them in the 2019 in person, and starting with the new way of working in 2020, we held 2 webinars. The last one was on gender equality in science, which was held on the 23rd of July, and this roundtable on the Fourth Industrial Revolution taking place today. Just a bit about the Academy. The African Academy of Sciences is a continental academy that has been in existence since 1985. It was launched alongside when the World Academy of Sciences was launched, and as an African continental academy that has been focused on all sciences and knowledge and focuses on a transdisciplinary approach for addressing the problems facing the African continent as contained in Agenda 2063 and our continental agenda for development on the continent, and STISA, with the Science, Technology and Innovation Strategy for Africa. It's the only continental academy in Africa enjoying the support of the AU, with joint programs that are undertaken with the African Union Development Agency, AUDA NEPAD, who is a very important partner in this activity. And we are undertaking this activity through a joint work plan that we've developed with the AUDA NEPAD. And we are supported by several governments and other major international partners. I'm glad to see that we have one of the governments that support us, the South African government joining us. We also are supported by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Wellcome Trust, and others. And this program is supported by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and NEPAD. So in 2015, we also launched alongside to undertake the programmatic work of the Academy, groundbreaking programmatic and agenda setting platform called the Alliance for Accelerating Excellence for Science in Africa, which is the AISA platform. And this is seeking to shift the gravity of science to Africa, with partnerships on the continent, very importantly with African governments, but also with international partners. Next slide, please. So what we are trying to do with this R&D priority setting exercise is to deliver on Africa's most needed R&D priorities. And the objectives of this STI priority setting exercise is to engage the scientific community and key policy stakeholders to look at what, from their point of view, what are the priorities for the African continent. And that's why this is an interactive section. We'll be using Mentimeter, which you will be guided through, where your inputs are very important. So it is to share with you the thoughts of these very eminent speakers that we have lined up, but it's also to get from you what are the priorities that are facing the continent. What we will do is we will gather this through this exercise of consultative work, this consultative roundtables, but also through further engagement into position papers to contribute to this scientific body of knowledge, and very importantly then disseminate and popularize it in partnership with the African Union development agencies and through other continental platforms. And what we're seeking to do then is to promote evidence-based policy making, to make sure that the investment that we're making in research on the continent through the various programs that are being undertaken by the Academy, but also through various other agencies and governments, is feeding into policy making and making sure that it's informing the decisions around how we develop into the future, specifically in post-COVID era. And then, very importantly, it's to inform decisions of the major actors, African governments and international partners, on which are the areas that they need to be investing in going forward. Very importantly for us, there's exercises that are taken from a political level by the African Union Commission, etc. But this is very important for us as a scientific community to also contribute to that, given the base of knowledge from which we are working. So for 5 years, the AAS and the African Union Development Agency, this is a 5-year program. So we're going to be taking an expanded role in this, in guiding Africa's innovation agenda towards these kinds of projects, to identify which are the areas that need investment, which are the areas where there's investment in research being made, and how can that research be more effectively used in decision making. Next slide, please. So I just want to give you an overview of the 3 waves of scientific priorities. The first wave was around genomics and precision medicine, maternal, neonatal, and child health, and climate change. The second wave, next slide, please, was on food and nutrition security, data and biospecimen governance, and epidemic preparedness. So very importantly, we are midway through the development of the policy papers for the priorities that we've already engaged with in 2019-2020, and we will be developing the papers for this next wave of scientific priorities. Could the next slide, please? So this third wave of scientific priorities, we've already had the workshop on gender and science. We are now undertaking this consultative roundtable on the 4th Industrial Revolution, and we will be in the future be engaging with you around the work that we're doing on mental health. Very important for you to know that through this process we are engaging with the eminent scientists who are part of our academy, but also outside of our academy, who will contribute to that exercise, who are experts in these specific areas working within committees that the academy has set up, and the one is looking at the 4th Industrial Revolution. So thank you very much, and I look forward to your active participation through the Mentimeter exercise and the presentations from our eminent, very high-level panel. I'll hand it back to you, Wesley. And I would then like to invite, before I hand it back to Wesley, our thought partner in this exercise, Dr. Agri Mbali, who is the Director of Technical Cooperation and Program Funding at the African Union Development Agency. So you have his colleague who reports to him, Dr. Justina, on the slide, but we're very, very happy to have Agri himself join us to give some opening remarks. Agri, over to you.
Thank you, Savani. Distinguished panel members, in the name of Professor John Mugabe, Muhammad Slim, Erien Ubarijoro, Professor Siris Marwara, and Tom Kariuki. On behalf of the African Union Development Agency, AUDA-NEPAD, and the African Academy of Sciences, I join my colleague in welcoming you to this expert consultative roundtable on the 4th Industrial Revolution, and we sincerely thank you for your participation. We know that there are so many competing activities that are on your table. We trust that you and your families are in good health and are safe, especially during these trying times. We are a continent of resilient people and know that we will overcome the challenges of this pandemic and work collectively towards recovery and sustainability of our economies. The AUDA-NEPAD wishes to acknowledge the joint work that we are doing with the African Academy of Sciences for quite some time. I think it's for several years that basically we've been engaging the academy in promoting research and development across the continent to inform policy towards the socio-economic development of our countries. The collaboration specifically includes identifying and developing scientific priority areas. I think that's the exercise that we are doing this afternoon. Processing those priority areas for dissemination to policymakers, our political leadership, as well as the our partners within and outside the continent. But more to it, as has been indicated, the African Academy of Sciences and AUDA-NEPAD, they basically are the co-creators and the co-owners of the ISA platform, which really is contributing to funding research on the continent. Now, this particular expert consultative roundtable is an outcome of this collaboration that we are enjoying, between the two institutions. And indeed, your presence reflects the support that basically you have, for such a strategic initiative to address and strengthen the work of the two institutions in empowering African governments and stakeholders to participate and benefit from the fourth industrial revolution, which basically I think we're going to be hearing to this afternoon, and you get the details of it from the distinguished panel members that basically going to be addressing us. The African Union underscores the importance of science, technology, and innovation to the, in terms of contribution to the socio-economic development of the continent. And this is all stipulated in the framework called the Science, Technology, and Innovation Strategy for Africa, STISA 2024, which was adopted by the African heads of state and government in 2014. As I have indicated, within the scope of democratization of technologies, this scientific participating exercise is one of the several processes that we do have in the African Union constituency. There are other platforms that support this, and namely the African Union High-Level Panel on Emerging Technologies, which has been working on several technologies and making recommendations for the for the leadership on the continent to be informed as to what is in the horizon, but also our ever program that is ever increasing in terms of popularity, which is the Casas Juma Executive Dialogue, which basically aims to engage political leaders, in the implementation of these priorities. So, ladies and gentlemen, as the world enters into the fourth industrial revolution, so as the world enters the fourth industrial revolution, we see that the continent cannot be left behind, and indeed, the conversation that is going on this afternoon is actually to give us a tour of where we come from and where we are heading to as a continent. You cannot be in any better hands of experts than the team that we have actually assembled for you this afternoon, this evening. These are distinguished scholars and practitioners that have been working on this subject and advising, several constituencies on the continent. So really, without taking too much time, I would like once again to thank you for showing up for this particular, e-meeting, as well as the, for the support that you have given us. I mean the AUDA, NEPAD, and AAS through this process. Thank you very much.
Thank you, colleagues, for those opening remarks. We now proceed to our first presentation. I'd like to invite Professor John Uoma Mugabe to give us a presentation on the priority setting process by introducing the role of 4IR in achieving Africa's Agenda 2063 and the SDGs. Prof. Uoma Mugabe is a professor of science and innovation policy at the University of Pretoria in South Africa, and is a fellow of the African Academy of Sciences. Professor, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's great to reconnect to old colleagues and friends today. What I'm going to do, first of all, let me just make a disclaimer. I'm not an expert on the fourth industrial revolution. I can't claim to be an expert. What I'm going to try to do in a relatively short period of time are the following. One is to suggest that in our discussions we have some conceptual clarity. What is this fourth industrial revolution? What are its key features, or what character it has? Make some statements on the role that the fourth industrial revolution technologies may play in assisting Africa to achieve its aspirations in Agenda 2063, in CITESA 2024, and some of the SDGs. And I'm going to be suggesting that Africa needs to sharpen focus on some specific priorities, Agenda 2063, CITESA, and SDGs. I'll then suggest some rationale why Africa requires some strategic investment approach, doing things differently. Then end by some proposed guidelines, principles to guide us in the priority setting process. The next slide. Hello? The fourth industrial revolution, everybody these days talks about this revolution, and there's a tendency to reduce the revolution, the fourth industrial revolution, to some specific technologies. So you go around, very often I engage my students, and some of them show me their cell phones and say, this is part of the fourth industrial revolution. Or people talk about particular economic activities as if, in fact, that's what the fourth industrial revolution is all about. I think we need in our discussions, in our priority setting process, to be clear, to have some conceptual clarity what it's all about. And there are all kinds of definitions that are floating around in the last few years. But generally, I think if we go through many of the proposed definitions, worldviews, what constitutes the fourth industrial revolution is largely around the ways, means by which individuals, companies, communities, economies, or even whole society generally engage in digital, what one would call digital domains, offline realities, using converging technologies to manage activities, to manage our lives. And I think we need to discuss this. The fourth industrial revolution, just like the industrial revolution, it's not about specific technologies, it's not about specific activities, but to a large extent it's actually a world in its own self. The technologies are embodied in our social and economic realities. So it's not just the mere existence of the technologies. And as some colleagues have already stated, these technologies are quite, many of them are disruptive. They are irreversibly changing our lives every day in many aspects, in the way we conduct our financial affairs, in the way we produce our food, in our transportation systems. They are changing in very irreversible ways our economies, our social systems. But also it's important to emphasize, in fact, the revolution is not based on some path. I've come across literature that tends to depict the revolution as if, in fact, we are moving from the first, second, third, now this is the fourth, and it's going to be the fifth. And I think we need to be careful this particular world and the technologies that are driving it is not based. Actually, they're not based on a particular path. Because you survived the so-called industrial revolution doesn't mean that you're going to survive the fourth one. That in fact will easily enter into the fifth, whatever the fifth is. So again, we need to have some clarity on what we are talking about. We more or less agree that the number of relatively new technologies, a number of emerging technologies that constitute this new context, this world. And I'm using the notion of a world very carefully here. These technologies are quite pervasive. Their applications are across sectors, across a wide range of economic activities. So are their impacts. The impacts are not going to be felt in one particular sector. The impacts are pervasive as well. We, I think, need to agree that these technologies in this new world are quite knowledge intensive. Many of them are actually science intensive for technologies, and they are quite converging. Biological technologies are converging with the mechanical technologies to form relatively new areas, if we want, new domains. Many of them are digital domains. However, I think one can rely on prior accumulated capabilities, particularly based on the digital knowledge and existing infrastructure. So the opportunities are there. We can actually reduce barriers to entry into the fourth industrial revolution. Next slide. For some reason, I can't move slides from. Yeah, next slide. So just some general proposals how Africa should focus or engage with the fourth industrial revolution. I think the broad emphasis should be on finding ways to maximize opportunities while reducing any negative consequences, social and economic consequences. I think a focus on maximizing opportunities will assist Africa to avoid this general rhetoric emphasis on so-called negative effect. So you come across a lot of misinformation. How the fourth industrial revolution is going to push Africa to the rescue of the global economy and so on. I think Africa's emphasis should be on opportunities, and that is clear if you look at Agenda 2063 aspirations, the SDGs that many African countries are focusing on. Vision 2030 statements of many countries are also exposure exposed to the global technology, whether digits by ones, specific industrial, I think we are more exposed. In fact, the technologies themselves expose us to the global pool of knowledge. And a number of studies have shown World Bank studies on Africa's exposure to new and emerging technologies, really an opportunity. And then the focus, which we need to really consider, should be around those goals that will enable Africa first and foremost to address basic needs, food and nutritional security, human health and well-being, human and social capabilities, issues of infrastructure, and we'll get more discussions on this. These are some of the priorities if we read CITESA 2024 that have been agreed on by African leaders. So the point here is that while we can talk generally about the fourth industrial revolution, I think we need to quickly start focusing on some specific African priorities. In Agenda 2063, with some of the SDGs in mind, and I think with a sharpened focus on the priorities articulated in CITESA 2024. The next slide. Hello. Hello, can we move to, okay, the next slide. The point I'm making on this slide is a relatively simple one, is that Africa requires a strategic approach. If you recall, in 50 years ago, Africa talked about the Green Revolution. Today we talk about the lost revolution. Africa lost the Green Revolution. Go with the revolution. Go how we talk another option. I think we quickly.
Professor John, we're really having challenges hearing you from this end. So maybe we could come back to see if your audio will have improved. I don't know about others, but I've really struggled to hear you the last 3 minutes.
I can hear you. I can hear you. Can you hear me now?
Breaking. The line is breaking a lot, so let's see if it breaks again for the next few seconds. Maybe you could finalize and we could move on. Okay. Thanks.
So you have the slides. So I think we need to have a strategic approach, and I've suggested why. I think we have renewed political leadership in the African Union, NEPAD. 50 years ago, we did not have an African Academy of Sciences. We have the Academy. So there is scientific leadership to get Africa to sharply focus its investments on the fourth industrial revolution, technologies and priorities. Then we also we have a number of very positive, if you want, transformative crises, climate change, COVID. We can't be searching for technologies and the revolution in the dark. It's a world that we are living in. We have a different job, political arena. 50 years ago, 25 years ago, we had the transatlantic, more specifically US, EU tensions on GMOs. With the fourth industrial revolution technologies, we are not seeing much of that. Next and last slide contains a number of principles to guide us how do we engage in this process, the priority setting process? And they're just general principles. The next slide. One is that we need to focus on. Hello, I can't see the slide, but generally we need to focus on what is feasible. There is a lot that we can discuss about things that are desirable and so on. And there are priorities that Africa can invest its resources in the short, medium, and long term. So feasibility, I think, is an important principle. And then the other principles we need to have a participatory process. My time has run out. You have the slides. So I look forward to a very rich engagement. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. We're going to go straight into our next presentation. Our next presenter is Professor Mohammed Sim Alouini, a professor of electrical engineering at the King Abdullah University of Science and Technology in Saudi Arabia. He will be discussing the main trends in 4IR for infrastructure development globally, as well as the infrastructure needs and key priorities towards promoting 4IR in Africa. Professor Alouini, I invite you to address us. Thank you. Prof, I think you're on mute.
Do you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I would like first to thank the organizer of this roundtable for inviting me to share my thoughts about the fourth industrial revolution, and more specifically about the importance of what I think is one of the main pillars of this digital revolution. And I mean here connectivity. Yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, this one is fine. So let's start this talk with, I would say, a brief history of the different industrial revolution. So the first industrial revolution was, as you know, about using kind of water and the steam engine for the mechanization of the production. And then in the middle of the 19th century, the electrification and the utilization of the assembly lines allowed mass production. Then, in the kind of the middle of the 20th century, the third industrial revolution used electronics and information technology of that age to automate production. And now, in this kind of fourth industrial revolution, it's kind of building on the third revolution to connect everyday objects like household appliance, cars, thermostat, etc., to the internet in order to enable this kind of seamless connection between people, processes and devices, and this is not requiring human to human or human to computer interaction. So, on the top of that, thanks to this combination of like what we call data analytics, low-cost computing, and the cloud, along communication and networking technologies, now physical objects can share and collect data with minimal human intervention. So this is leading us to this so-called hyper-connected world in which the physical world meets and collaborates with the digital world. Next slide, please. Yeah, next slide. So in big part, this fourth industrial revolution is a direct result of the possibilities offered by this kind of billion of people, machine, devices being connected or on their way to be connected. And here I emphasize on the word connected or connectivity. And of course, this connectivity is coming with an unprecedented computational power, storage capabilities, access to all kinds of information and knowledge. So actually, some argue that mobile is the most rapidly adopted consumer technology in history. So this is in one way the result of the merger of the internet and wireless communication and a few other things like electronics and so on. So today we can use our mobile or if you will tablets, laptop and whatnot to make phone and video calls, browse the internet, take and share photo and video clips, check time and actually accurately get our even location and many more things, as you know. So when you think about it, it's truly amazing how many on what was considered independent functions, independent services, I would say even independent device just a few years ago, have been integrated over the last decade or so in a single mobile user equipment. So this explains in a way why people think that the mobile has grown faster than any technology in history. But of course, like mobile user, IoT networks still want more, like higher data rate, more coverage, better connectivity, access anytime, anywhere, and you want this to be done like in a kind of cheaper and even I would say more affordable fashion. So next slide, please. So these, I would say, increasing demands are something that we have seen over and over again during the past 4 decades. So like 1G was in a way the proof of concept stage, and it brought us to the 80s, the first mobile phones. And then during the 90s, 2G made us move from analog communication to better quality digital communication with both voice and texting exchange capabilities. Then came the 3G era into the 2000s, and with it we moved online and start browsing the internet from our mobiles. And we are now enjoying the high speed provided by our 4G smartphones, a speed that is expected to go to, let's say, higher values and to connect a higher number of devices and machines with the deployment of 5G, which is, as we know, happening pretty much as we speak. So next slide, please. So when you look at 5G, it comes with 3 uses, what we call user scenarios. The first one is EMBB, that's enhanced mobile broadband. It's focused on supporting, the ever-increasing end-user data rate and the system capacity increase. So potential application of this user scenario are ultra-high definition video streaming, 3D video conferencing, and virtual reality. Next slide. So the second user scenario is known as MMTC. So it stands for Massive Machine Type Communication. It's a new service that can support extremely high connection density of online devices, including sensor and actuator. We are talking here about IoT kind of concept pushed to the extreme with about 1 connected device per meter square, or equivalently 1 million connected devices per kilometer square. And the potential applications are really in the heart of the 4th industrial revolution, such as, for example, industrial control and all kind of applications are kind of illustrated in the slide in front. Next slide, please. So the next user scenario is ultra reliable, low latency communication. Basically, it will cater to multiple advanced services for latency sensitive connected devices. And this applies to factory automation, autonomous car driving, the so-called industrial internet, or even robotic remote surgeries. Next slide. So next slide, yeah. So basically, as you may have noticed in the previous, like one of the previous slides, it takes about 10 years to design, develop, validate a generation of mobile communication system, and it takes another 10 years to deploy it, expand its users until it becomes mature and it gets eventually retired so that the following generation gets adopted. So you can easily guess that as we start deploying 5G, and here by we, I mean researcher and telecommunication engineering like myself, we already have started brainstorming and planning for what should 6G be. So it's kind of, let's say, speculative time, and there has been more than a dozen of perspective papers that have been published over the last year or so, giving their vision on how beyond 5G or 6G network should push the envelope and target, let's say, higher speed, more user capacity, and lower latency for a variety of emerging and future applications that are displayed in front of you. So we can say that the 6G train towards better performance, better quality of service is actually already moving and moving quite fast. Next slide, please. Now, please look carefully at the map in front of you, showing basically the current worldwide 4G distribution or the connectivity distribution in the world. It's clear that we, and here in particular those of us in Africa, are suffering from serious gaps in global internet connectivity. Next slide. So here we have the numbers, and we tend indeed to forget that we still have about half of the world population, or about 4 billion people. In Africa, people say maybe 2/3 of the African population without internet connectivity. And it's expected that 5G, in its kind of current initial deployment stages, will further accentuate this connectivity divide. Actually, we are in this COVID-19 pandemic time, and what it showed that the connectivity divide can be sometimes as a matter of, let's say, life and death for people who are unable to access essential healthcare information and services, and is in a way becoming the new face of inequality, deepening the economical and social imbalances between the haves and have-not. Thus, in a way, 6G should also be about, connecting the unconnected. Next slide, please. And by the way, when you look at this kind of map, of course, Africa is very much affected, and the main reason behind that is, to be able to connect some of these remote region or remote areas. It's kind of difficult from a business perspective to lay this hundreds of kilometers, 1,000 kilometers of fibers to reach sparsely populated populations. And also, to have connectivity, you need to rely on a grid, and the grid in many of these countries is either not available, or if it's available, it's not very reliable. So that's one part of the story. But actually, this kind of connectivity divide can not only touch these remote areas, but it can touch actually the heart of urban area, in particular low-income neighborhood, or let's say slums and so on in big cities. And there is many studies showing quite a high correlation between household income and the level of connectivity in some of the big cities in the world. And of course, African cities tend also to suffer from that. Next slide, please. Yeah. So obviously, this is an issue that is quite important. We should engage globally, and in particular in Africa, because we suffer the most, in active efforts to narrow this so-called connectivity divide, in order to offer the often economically and socially isolated people who are unconnected, the experience and the transformative benefit that come with connectivity. From access to better health and education, to smart farming, new jobs, real-time financial service, which are all, again, in the heart of the fourth industrial revolution. So this key infrastructure, which is connectivity, if it is not there, many of the fourth industrial revolution kind of, benefits will not be able to be used, served, or accessed by these kind of population or areas that are unconnected, because you cannot essentially make people or machines connected to the network. Next slide, please. So the idea is to try to connect the remaining unconnected place in the world, and to move from, in a way, this kind of narrow concept of smart cities to a broader concept of smart living, not only in big cities, but also even within cities, like low-income neighborhood, outside cities, villages, rural area, should be able to connect and basically take full advantage of the advantage and benefit that comes with connectivity. So the question is, how can we do that? and how can we engage in this activity. Next slide. So I will give you maybe 2 or 3 technical slides, but I hope I will not lose you with that. So if you look at the diagram displayed in front of you, you can see that the traditional, what we call geostationary satellite communication system, which are of course great for TV broadcasting, I mean, their main problem is that they offer limited bandwidth and in a way suffer from a high latency as far as internet browsing is concerned. So they cannot deliver fiber quality for our purposes. The same diagram illustrates that full deployment of fiber cables or microwave wireless link is not economically feasible to connect these kind of remote or rural area, which are typically characterized by a low density of populations. So our goal is to go after what I call the global connectivity holy grail on the top left of the diagram displayed in front of you. And I mean by that, we are going for the best of both worlds and target terrestrial fiber quality, but with a global satellite coverage, hopefully fulfilling this kind of interesting prophetic prediction made 100 years ago by Nikola Tesla, and that you can read in the slide displayed in front of you. So next slide, please. So now, in this context, we, and again, telecom engineers, research worldwide, are starting these novel communication schemes that integrate satellite, airborne, and terrestrial network, and that are aiming to support land, maritime, and flying user and devices. So more specifically, we are after self-organized networks that rely on base station on the ground, drones, balloons, high-altitude platform, and non-geostationary satellites. And all these networks that are going to adapt their structure and their resource allocation based on the ground population, based on the machine density, and the quality of service required by the application used by these populational machines of users on the ground. So of course, we are not alone. And if you're following the tech news, you have probably seen the intense and global activity around the variety of ambitious projects in this area. So I'm talking here about, for example, the SpaceX Starlink or the Amazon Kuiper. Both are about non-geostationary satellite mega constellation. There is also this network of balloons launched by Loon Google project, and actually is now serving a rural area in Kenya. As far as I can tell, there was a few weeks ago a nice article, I think in the New York Times, about how Loon is providing internet in Kenya and in Peru. So in my view, Africa has to be involved and has to benefit from this space race to bring broadband internet for all people and for all machine and devices that have to be connected and that have to be deployed in our continent. Next slide. So another important aspect I mentioned earlier is that one of the main barriers, to connect, people is actually the power grid, one way to kind of bypass that is to rely on renewable powered access points. So actually, there was a nice kind of article about a year ago in CNN showing this interesting solution in Rwanda, where you see these kiosks where people can charge their phones and it's solar powered. You can associate to that essentially base station or access point that are relying on wind turbines and solar panels. So basically, you rely on your own generated clean and green power to basically make sure that your network is always up and running. Next slide. So let me kind of wrap up this presentation by making some what I call suggestion, or let's say recommendation. I think we should work towards digital inclusion, equivalently what people call global access internet for all, called Gaia. And this can be done with revised regulation and policies, new business models, new innovative wireless communication networking technology, as I talked about earlier. Two, I think, and something I didn't kind of emphasize before, But obviously, as we rely more and more in our daily life, in our kind of economy on connectivity, on wireless communication, we need to make sure that our network are super secure. So we need to invest in developing more security and more secure networks. Number three, we need also to make sure that increasing and democratizing connectivity has to be done in a sustainable fashion by relying on renewable sources of energy to operate the ground infrastructure and improve the power efficiency of our networks. And finally, again, because we'll be relying so much on this kind of networks, we need to improve their resilience and their reliabilities to make sure that basically, they are always on. So next slide, please. So with that, I would like to thank you for listening to me. You may want to enjoy reading this last quote by Tesla, like again, roughly 100 years ago, which kind of predicted like what we are getting into with the fourth industrial revolution. And I would be happy to take some questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Aluni. We will have time for questions later on. I hope that everyone will post their questions in the questions box. At this point, before we get to our next speaker, we want to engage with you through our first engagement session. And as noted on the agenda, we'd like to do this through posing questions to you. In this first round, we'll be addressing the first two questions. I'll read that out before I hand over to Olivia to take us through that. What are the main critical research infrastructure priorities to advance 4IR for Africa's development? And the second question is, to what infrastructure needs should we direct the 4IR research, development, and innovation in Africa? So with that, let me hand over to Olivia to guide us through the process of capturing your contributions to these questions. Olivia?
Thank you, Wesley. On the chat box, you'll find a link to the Mentimeter tool, and you'll be timed for each question. Please click on the link. For the first question, you will have 1 minute, 30 seconds, and please begin to answer now. I hope you can all see the question.
Just a note here, in your chat box, you'll find the link. So click on the link and allow it to open up in your browser and enter your answers in the browser itself.
You have about 30 more seconds to submit, and then we'll move to the next question. Please submit now. For this question, you also have 1 minute, 30 seconds. Please begin to answer now.
So just a note to everyone, if you've submitted an answer already, you're welcome to refresh the link and register additional answers.
If the answers are coming in, you have about 45 more seconds. Ten more seconds. And the voting closes now. Thank you, everyone. Back to you, Wesley.
Okay. Thank you, Olivia and team. Just a note that we will collate all of your answers in the background, and we'll review that and reflect on that later in the program. So let us move swiftly to our next presenter, Prof. Elian Ubali-Joro. Prof. Ubali-Joro is the Deputy Director for Programs at Global Open Data in Agriculture and Nutrition. She's a Professor of Practice for Public and Private Sector Partnerships at McGill University and a Fellow of the African Academy of Sciences. Presentation today will deal with how the 4IR can be harnessed to enable inclusive food and health systems in Africa. So over to you, Professor.
Leanne, you need to unmute yourself kindly. Unmute yourself, please. So be somewhere next to your name and you'll see, let's see.
Okay, yeah, no, it said organizer had muted me, so that's why I couldn't unmute myself. Okay.
Sorry about that.
No problem, no problem. So I just wanted to make sure you can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Okay, excellent. Yes. Okay. I just want to thank Mohammed for the excellent overview that he gave, and so that will allow me to maybe save us a little bit of time from the background. I will skip over some of these. So just in terms of the skills needed, the fourth industrial revolution is really prioritizing certain skill sets. And in terms of how education systems in Africa need to be strengthened, this is going to matter a lot. And even we can see that between 2015 and 2020, those skill sets are changing. And I'm just going to read the 2020 top skill sets. So complex problem solving, second, critical thinking, third, creativity, fourth, people management, coordinating with others, 5, 6, emotional intelligence, 7, judgment and decision making, 8, service orientation, 9, negotiation, 10, cognitive flexibility. So as scientists, it's really important that as we apply the fourth industrial revolution to Africa, that we prioritize these skills even in science-driven programs. And so these are really important skills for us to just keep in mind. And I just wanted to start out with this because mindsets are really the most important space we need to start changing for the technology to really have far-reaching applications. And so just wanted to start with, these are the two biggest expenses smallholder farmers have. One is fertilizers. Many African countries spend over $1 billion a year on fertilizer. And the second is healthcare. According to the World Bank, people in developing countries spend $500 billion annually. So that's about $80 per person of out-of-pocket payments. And there's 400 million people that lack access to essential healthcare services, mostly in Africa and East Asia. So my presentation is going to focus on agriculture and health. And so this is really the background I want you to start out with. And so in the areas of health market applications, the African Development Bank has prioritized these areas. So these are AI, machine learning, drones, big data, data science, 3D printing, blockchain technologies, and all of these have net positive impact on competitiveness. And so the issue here is access to health, not competitiveness. So everything we're able to bring to African markets to do research and development on, to create more enabling policies, will all have positive effects on African economies. And so one of the really important aspects to realize is this idea of the last mile delivery networks. And so this is all about logistics, procurement, and data science. And I wanted to use this African example that I really find fabulous, and it's M-Pharma. Some of you may know about M-Pharma or not. But M-Pharma has a network now of over 243 pharmacies in several African countries. Sorry, I was just trying to. And several African countries, and they're serving 40,000 patients monthly. So they've able to reduce drug prices for up to 30% and eliminate a lot of clinical inefficiencies. And clinics have reported a decrease of 35% of medical-related complications. Sorry for the error there. So Gregory Roxon, who's the CEO from Ghana, has raised already around $21.3 million in venture fund. And what does this say? We all know the issues about counterfeit drugs, around availability of drugs. And this is what we need to realize is the fourth industrial revolution, by improving logistics, procurement, and better use of data, we can eliminate a lot of the issues that are actually keeping us in survival traps and would really allow us to create prosperity, virtuous cycles in Africa. And so here are some of the areas in terms of key priorities that governments and funders need to invest on. And so I had shown the skills first. And so leadership and governance are really important ones. So that's 80% of the pie here. And finances, context and population come in second place, followed by service delivery, human resources, infrastructure and supplies, knowledge and information. So these are all areas where the fourth industrial revolution can really help us boost productivity in Africa. Okay, okay. So just to go quickly, in terms of the agricultural space, we've talked a little bit, Mohammed has talked about the importance of infrastructure, but we also, and I really was really happy that he didn't talk only about smart cities, but also talked about smart villages, because when we have smart villages, what we have is we can decrease the rate of rural exodus that is really in creating an influx of populations in the city that are making them unmanageable, and also taking away populations that could help us increase productivity and access and utilization of fourth industrial revolution in agriculture to help us feed Africa. So right now, Africa is importing about $110 billion worth of food annually. And if we have smarter ways of producing, so if we have enabling environments and enabling technologies and the human capital development, this could transform the landscape in Africa, and we could have vibrant, smart, connected villages in rural areas that are feeding our cities and that are allowing environmental sustainability to come hand in hand with greater productivity on the health and agricultural side. In terms of the agricultural market spaces, the AI applications, this can range into plant breeding to selection, intelligent robots, allowing identification of biological anomalies, spatial planning, analysis of soil and weather conditions. I love how Mohammed was talking about the fact that we have satellite data, we have airborne and terrestrial ways to get data that can help us. And in agriculture, all of these are really critical. I come from Rwanda, and you know, we've been using drones not only in the health sector in terms of being able to get kits, blood supplies at any hospitals within minutes around the country, but this is also looking at ground cover, level of productivity in areas, land degradation. These are really important ways to look at how are we managing our soils. 75% of African soils are in the states of degradation, and so all of this data can really help us understand how do we do agricultural better to restore data. And also, we know that when farmers have access to data, three things: when they have access to market data, weather data, and some type of data around what type of fertilization schemes to have, they increase automatically their income about 30%. So really having internet-enabled systems that connect farmers to capacity of growing great amounts of food is really critical. We also know that 3D printing can help in health around printing medical supplies, but as well in agriculture in terms of machines. And in terms of food traceability is something that's really critical and that can help us not only feed ourselves, but also give greater value to the produces that we export and in terms of having greater foreign funds coming into the countries. So having access to these technologies all have net positive impact that are very high, and they have very little potential and very little downside. So as you see, both in health and agriculture, it's really an upside if we have ways of allowing this to reach the most marginalized and the most remote, and the ones who right now are facing the greatest data inequities. And so one of the areas that I think is really important is how do we have knowledge hubs? Knowledge hubs, agriculture digital innovation hubs will link all stakeholders in real time in the future for African food systems that are resilient, sustainable, and that will harness the best of regenerative agriculture and digital innovation. These two are critical together because Africa is one of the most vulnerable continents to climate change. And so what we really need is having that combination of regenerative agriculture and digital innovations that minimize inputs, maximize information so that we can produce more with the least amount of input and have greater incomes coming to farmers, more young people wanting to go into farming. We know that the average age of a farmer in Africa is 59 years old. And so if we can bring the fourth industrial revolution to all aspects of agricultural productivity, then this can attract a lot more young people. And so I want to share an example with you that I heard yesterday from the World Bank. And Tani Hub is an amazing company in Indonesia, and what they have been working on, and we do have examples in Africa that are doing this, but I'm not sure we have it at such a scale. And so what they have been working is connecting farmers to markets, to storage, and to ensure a seamless logistical framework. And why is this so important? So one of the things that's important is in Africa, I'm just going to take Nigeria as an example. This is a map of how they are distributing their logistic framework in Indonesia. But in Nigeria, 90% of the tomatoes are lost because of lack of post-harvest management and logistics to get to customers. And so in a lot of cases, 50% of productivity is lost in Africa. So if we have really good sourcing and logistics, cold chain processing to ensure that as soon as produce is available and ripe, that we're able to connect it to consumers, to markets, to hotels and restaurants, and any other outlets that distribute them, we can take post-harvest losses from, in some cases, these 90% to close to zero. And this could be significantly change ways that farmers are operating, the incomes they have. And this is just to show you what the possibilities are. So in case of Tani Fund, not only have they created this system to connect the whole logistics, but they've also done this in ways that unbankable smallholder farmers are able to apply for credit directly from Tani Hub. And this has created an overall increase in income of about up to 120%. Harvest absorption of 100%. Remember, I was telling you that post-harvest losses in Africa are between 50 and 90%. And these funds, because this is all digital currency, within 30 days, they have the money. And having the assistance of crop monitoring to know when to plant, what type of fertilizer, how much water to add, where are the spots in the fields that have issues, this has increased the yield by 80%. And this can help farmers and organizations that are connecting to farmers know exactly when to plant, what to plant, which varietals will work best in the agricultural ecological systems that are in. So the power of connectivity, in the case of M-Pharma, they are ensuring that we have access to medicine at the lowest available cost in ways that are minimizing issues of corruption that lead to fake drugs being available on the continent. They're ensuring that people who have non-communicable diseases that require daily medicines have their proper medicines at the lowest cost possible. So these are all pluses that we need to harness. And what's really important is to realize that this is all about how do we connect all those parts together. And whether it's M-Pharma, whether it's Tiny Hub, whether it's organizations like Agribora based in Kenya or other e-commerce and platforms in Africa, it's really about, the first thing is how are we establishing the onboarding to ensure that the populations locally have trust that we have systems that have high efficiency, that are creating great transparency, and that are ensuring that farmers are getting the best prices for their products. And so what is really important as we move through this fourth industrial revolution is not only to harness all of these capabilities as researchers and as advisors to policymakers so that they have real-time data for better decision making, but we also have to realize that the rate of acceleration is so high that we also need to remember this. And I really love this by Yuval Noah Harari, who wrote Homo Sapiens, and this is from the 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, is if we are willing to make efforts to understand foreign cultures, unknown species, and distant planets, it might be worth just as hard, it might be worth working just as hard in order to understand our own minds. And we had better understand our minds before the algorithms make our mind up for us. For a few more years or decades, we still have a choice. If we make the effort, we can still investigate who we really are. But if we want to make use of this opportunity, we had better do it now. And this is a really important time for Africa to do it now, because as we see, there are only upsides to investing in this space in terms of how the fourth industrial revolution can help the most marginalized have better access to health and agriculture. But we need to do it in ways that our mindsets are going to really create the enabling conditions for empowering this data inequity that we have now and transform it into an empowered, data-driven transformation of the continent that really uplifts all. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Lian, for that wonderful presentation. Very insightful, and I think it's going to help us in the next engagement session, which we'd like to engage with the participants. So in this engagement session, we will have a look at 3 questions, and we'll follow the same process again. I'm going to read the questions out so that before handing over to Olivia. So the third question is, what 4IR research questions should be prioritized to address challenges in Africa's agri-food systems? The fourth question is, what 4IR research questions should be prioritized to address challenges in Africa's health system? And finally, are there development needs that are yet to benefit from 4IR and that we should be considering as a continent? So I now invite Olivia to once again guide us through the process for capturing our answers and feedback regarding those questions. Olivia?
Thank you, Wesley. Hello again, everyone. So you will use the same link and the same code as before. And again, we will time you. For this question, you have 1 minute, 30 seconds. Please begin to answer now.
Okay, so thank you very much, Olivia and team. Thank you all for your submission. We will get back to those to reflect on them. We look forward to hearing from all of you. So we've now come to the keynote address in the program, which will be delivered by Professor Chilitsi Marwala. Professor Chilitsi Marwala serves as the Deputy Chair of the Presidential Commission on the Fourth Industrial Revolution, a commission which is chaired by President Cyril Ramaphosa, South Africa. Professor Marwala is the Vice Chancellor and Principal of the University of Johannesburg in South Africa, and he is a Fellow of the African Academy of Sciences. Professor Marwala, the stage is yours to address us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wesley, and thank you very much for Professor Mugabe for organizing this forum and inviting me to come and speak. Grace, can you put my presentation on?
Professor Marwala, let me confirm with the team that they can share your slides. If not, team, I'm happy to share the slides from my end. You'll get to see them in a bit. Give me sharing, right, Steve?
Yeah, and I can see it now. Thank you very much. Can you go to the can you go to the second slide, please? Next slide. No, yeah. So basically, I will be talking about the fourth industrial revolution and some of the activities that are happening in Africa. And I will end my presentation by talking about the recommendations of the Fourth Industrial Revolution Commission in South Africa as what needs to be done in order to put South Africa into the fourth industrial age. I will also talk about some of the flow from our recommendations to the African Union. This year, our president is also the chairman of the African Union, and one of the recommendations that he made when he accepted the chairmanship flew directly from our recommendation. So basically, the fourth industrial revolution is the fourth because there was the first, second, and the third. And you know, the biggest problem with all these revolutions is that we as Africans have primarily been spectators, not participants. If you look at the first industrial revolution, we have barely industrialized. England was the first country to industrialize in the world, but we don't have a fully industrialized society, a country in the African continent. And if we look at the second industrial revolution, you know, electricity and mass production of goods and services, the amount of goods and services that we import from outside the continent is actually quite, you know, huge. And we need to start asking ourselves, why haven't we started producing some of these goods? What we know is that you need political stability to be able to attract companies to come and set up manufacturing plants in the African continent and thereby start producing goods and services. And another invention of the second industrial revolution is electricity. The amount of electrification of the African continent leaves much to be desired, and we need to do much about that. You know, here in South Africa, the security of supply of energy is in question. And these are things that need to be sorted out if we are going to increase our competitiveness. Now, the third industrial revolution, which is the electronic age, is said that you know, it's almost 70 years after the invention of the semiconductor device, you hardly have any significant semiconductor company in the African continent. In fact, I do not know any. So as a result, the electronic age has not really taken root. Things as simple as an electronic watch, we have to import that from the rest of the world. Now we're living in what is called the fourth industrial revolution. If you could just go to the next page, please. And it's really a confluence of several, Grace, if you could go to the next page. It's really a confluence of a number of technologies. Grace, are you there?
Yes, Professor Marwala. Davis, kindly move to the next slide. Sometimes it takes a few seconds to reflect, but definitely it should be moving.
Oh, yeah. So the fourth industrial revolution is a confluence of developments in the cyberspace, in the physical space, in the biological space. So the confluence and the interaction and the fusion of these technologies is really what is giving us what is called the fourth industrial revolution. Now, in the cyberspace, I'm going to use the word cyber because digital technology is a technology that is going to be replaced by quantum computing. The idea of communicating with ones and zeros has worked very well for us, but I think as we move much on in this century, we're going to see more and more quantum computers. So you have all these technologies: artificial intelligence, blockchain, Internet of Things. These are technologies that you find in the cyberspace, in the physical space, robotics, 3D printing. Elaine was talking about 3D printing, and new materials that are emerging, such as graphene, and developments in biological field, bioinformatics, which is a fusion of biology and cyber technologies, is one of the things that are happening here. So the fusion of all this is really what is called the fourth industrial revolution. If you could just go to the next page. Now, recently, Wesley and I and Babu wrote a book on the disruptive fourth industrial revolution to see how we can be able to, what are some of the big questions that we have to deal with, whether it is in the legal aspect of this, whether it is in the real technologies of the fourth industrial revolution and all its diversity. And I think there is quite a great deal of excellence, pockets of excellence in the African continent that I think all of us should use as a catalyst to make sure that we can be able to diffuse some of this knowledge to the rest of the African continent and to the rest of our economy, so that we can be able to improve our economic activity. Now, if we just move on. One of the technologies that is really quite dominant in the fourth industrial revolution is artificial intelligence. When we were developing the fourth industrial revolution strategy in South Africa, we soon realized that many countries actually do not have the fourth industrial revolution strategies. They actually have the AI strategy. And the reason for that is because of all those technologies, the concept of making machines intelligent is really going to fundamentally change almost all aspects of our economy. Artificial intelligence can be fused with blockchain, for example, to create much more effective miners. Miners are some of the components of blockchain technology. The Internet of Things is being driven by artificial intelligence. Of course, when you connect all these devices and you add intelligence on top of this, you can be able to do many complex things, such as real-time diagnosis of certain diseases just by monitoring, certain signals and manipulating them using artificial intelligence. So artificial intelligence is really what is driving this, but artificial intelligence does not work unless we have data. Data is the new oil. And consequently, as the African continent, we need to start thinking about how do we harness our data and commercialize that, monetize that, taking data into monetary value. And what is happening is that quite a great deal of African data is being taken away every day by companies such as Facebook, Twitter, and so on and so forth. And they are not being taken away for any other reason except for monetization and commercial exploitation. And I think as the African continent, we need to start thinking about how we can be able to firstly control the mining of our own data, and secondly, how to exploit the commercial value of that. Can we go to the next one, please? So this artificial intelligence is changing all aspects of our economy, whether it is in our banks. And the consequence of this is that the world of work is actually becoming small. I sit on a board of a bank, and it is amazing how much things that normally used to be done by a human being are being done by machines, almost to the point that it is expected that many banks are going to lose at least half of their workforce, because simply there's no need for those. For example, I have not visited a branch of my bank this year, simply because I can do all the transactions on my phone. What happens to all the thousands and thousands of people who are employed in the banks to look after those branches? When you apply for the loan now, it is no longer a human being who is going to credit score you. It is an artificial intelligence machine, and we need to see, and we cannot stop the adoption of these technologies because they bring competitiveness. What we need to do is to make sure that we skill our people to be able to insert themselves in the value chain of the creation of this, the creation and the utilization of these technologies. If you could just go to the next page, please. Tell me if I'm running short of time. Can you go to the next page, please? So in medical applications, diagnosis of diseases, I saw the cover page of The Economist, where they were saying that AI machines are better radiologists than human beings. This basically means that the whole field of radiology will at the least change, which basically means that instead of interpreting images, human agents interpreting images, that task is actually done by machines. And it has all sorts of implications on how we train doctors. I think we need to infuse much more technological know-how in our doctors. Can we move on to the next page, please? These technologies are even changing, the level of infrastructure. This is an example of a bridge that collapsed in Centon, and now you can use AI to predict this catastrophic situation before it actually happens, so that you can be able to block the road and get people to, and save people's lives. The whole concept of the whole asset management philosophy it has to change, and our legal framework has to change, because when you have something like this, you have all sorts of regulations on how how a building should be constructed. In fact, you take it to the authorities so that they can approve the plans and so on and so forth. Now, given the fact that now you have a very intelligent and much more accurate technology than human agents, all these things, and it also has implication on how we train engineers going forward. If we could just move to the next slide, please. This is an example of an application of AI, remote sensing. And it recommends what plants you should plant where and when, incorporate things like crop rotation. And now this is very, very important for a country like South Africa, which has huge tracts of land that is not being used, to diffuse expertise, instead of having expensive experts who come and analyze the soil and make all sorts of recommendations. And many people don't even do that, and as a result, we are not cultivating optimally. Things like this, you install it on a drone, and you can be able to just ride it above a piece of land, and it recommends what needs to be done well. Next page, please. Now, I want to come to the recommendations of the Fourth Industrial Revolution Commission of South Africa. We met over the years and over the last year, and we came up with 8 recommendations, which I actually presented them to the President of South Africa last week. So one of the first recommendations that we have made is actually to invest in human capital. It is quite clear that the skill sets that are required in the Fourth Industrial Revolution are vastly different from the skill sets that we required before. For us to be able to get people who can be able to code, it basically means we have to train people quite differently. So invest in human capital, which is around the technologies of the Fourth Industrial Revolution. The second recommendation is the establishment of a National AI Institute. And of course, the President took this initiative and took it to the African Union, where the African Union is busy establishing the Africa AI Forum, which is going to deal with issues of AI and how it is handled in the African continent. And then the third recommendation is around manufacturing and the implementation of technologies. South Africa has been deindustrializing because we have not invested in advanced technologies. It is very, very clear that if we do not insert these technologies into our production value chain, then we are not going to be competitive, and goods will come from China simply because they price us out of the market because we have not invested in technologies. And then the fourth recommendation is around securing and availing data to enable innovation. There are 2 types of data you have. You have data that is supposed to be private, like in Home Affairs, and data that is supposed to be public, like anonymized health data. So that you may have to avail it to people who can be able to come and look into this and build apps that they can be able to use in order to do things better. For example, in our health system, the Department of Health collects millions of X-ray images. They have millions of X-ray images in their database. Now, if we can be able to get an expert in deep learning who can come look at those X-rays images and the diagnosis that has been made, it means it is already labeled. Then you can be able to create a system which you can only just give it an X-ray image, and it will tell you whether the person has TB or not. And obviously, this is very important to augment the availability of doctors, especially in rural areas. And the other issue that is very important is the issue of data centers. How do we store our data? Do we build our own data centers, or do we rent a cloud? If we rent a cloud, what are the implications on cybersecurity? And there are a whole range of recommendations that we make underneath the securing and availing data to enable innovation. And then the fifth recommendation is around incentivizing future industries, platforms, and applications of OIR technologies. I think Robert Schiller was once asked, can you please summarize economics in one word? And his answer was incentives. If you don't incentivize people to adopt technologies, they are not going to adopt those technologies. Those incentives can be tax breaks. They could be special economic zones where people have access to research data, research material, research support, In South Africa, we have the nation-sized Council for Scientific and Industrial Research. Maybe we can use that as a mechanism of incentivizing people to adopt these technologies. The issue of infrastructure, Slim talked about this quite extensively. You know, without good connectivity, we are not going to be able to succeed. 5G is here, and we have to adopt it. Some people are claiming that there are health issues, but as far as my knowledge is concerned, there are no health issues. You know, the infrastructure of the data infrastructure, the water infrastructure is very, very important. The energy infrastructure. How do we make sure that all this infrastructure is available so that our country can be can actually thrive in the fourth industrial age? And then the issue of legislation is very important. You know, how do we bring things like Airbnb into our tax regime? Our laws are not adapted to the fourth industrial revolution. Of course, our lawmakers must become more scientifically and technologically literate for them to be able to craft legislations to be able to do this. So there are a whole range of recommendations under this on how we can be able to actualize this. And the last recommendation is about implementation. As Africans, we are speaking too much and doing too little. I think it is time to get technocrats to start actually doing. We have to start doing. We have to start implementing. We'll make mistakes when we implement, but implementation is really what we need to do. Next page, please. So, I mean, finally, in the last few slides, I wanted to talk about sustainable development goals and how we can be able to use AI to be able to deal with these issues. I think we are not going to be able to even begin to meet the SDGs unless we implement you know, these fourth industrial revolution technologies. In fact, I think one of the things that we need to do, the United Nations needs to do, is to start marrying this technology. I know the issues of technology is one of the goals, but I think it should be an overarching thing. It's a driver. It is supposed to be the driver that drives almost everything, whether it is the issue around inequality, whether it is the issue around poverty, whether it is an issue around education. All these things can actually be facilitated for efficient implementation using the technologies of the fourth industrial revolution. Next page, please. Now, I think I've talked about this. If we could go to the last slide, and then I shall be done. So now, what are some of the consequences of the fourth industrial revolution that we need to note? I think the issue of the world of work is very, very important. It is clear that automation is going to have a drastic impact on the world of work. What does the AAS do about it? How do we advise lawmakers so that we do something about it? Are we even thinking about it? Are there strategies on how we are going to deal with this issue? I think the issue of inequality is a consequence of the shrinking of the world of work. It's not just the shrinking of the world of work, it's also the migration of jobs to centers which are much more efficient. You know, if we are not competitive, not only are we going to lose jobs, but even our own production is going to, we're going to lose it, it is going to go elsewhere. The issue of regulation of these things that follow us everywhere. You know, if you are on Twitter or Facebook, you are being watched. You know, what do we do about it? I think the issue of nationality is quite key. People are becoming nationalistic now, while the technology is actually breaking down the boundaries of nationality. And in South Africa, I mean, we hang in shame about the xenophobic attack. You know, how do we use some of these technologies to detect the flaring up of right-wing, right-wing nationalistic, xenophobic outbreaks, so that we can deal with the root cause of the problem. I think the issue of democracy is going to be increasingly challenged. I think technologies are going to be increasingly used to undermine democracy. We know about deep fakes that are now being used to impersonate political opponents in order to subvert democracy. I think the issue of ethics is another issue that is very, very important, that we need to deal with it. And thank you very much. I think this is the end of my talk. It was a little bit rushed because you gave me only 20 minutes. Sorry, I think I went a little bit overboard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Marwala, for that insightful presentation. And now we will move to our next session, where we will go through the reflect on the answers from your engagements. I hand over to Grace to handle this. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Wesley. I hope everyone can see my screen. You can confirm that. Allow me to briefly go through the results of the questions that you responded to. And really, just to say something about these questions, we look for a way to get more from the audience, just to have an idea of what your thoughts are with regards to the subject that we are discussing today. And so we asked you 5 questions, and the first one was relating to what critical research infrastructure priorities we could advance for the industrial revolution for Africa's development. And I'll just highlight some of those which I thought were critical. There was technology transfer in universities, digital literacy access, broadband access, but also there was this interesting aspect of an institutional approach that combines think tanks and universities to undertake research and disseminate to policymakers with regards to fourth industrial revolution. There were issues about fair access for the poorest, issues to do with research capacity, manufacturing capacity, but also there was the idea about critical thinking in knowledge development, because equally that's very important when you're thinking about the fourth industrial revolution. We had a second question where we asked you to let us know what needs, what infrastructure needs should we direct the fourth industrial revolution research, development, and innovation in Africa. And as you can see from the word cloud on your screen, many of you talked about internet, connectivity, education, but also want to pick out some which are not as big as you can see them. There were issues about skills, health, energy, fair access, networks. And this subject about fair access is coming up over and over. And Professor Marwala has said at his presentation talking about these issues as well. The other question you responded to were the kind of research questions that we should be prioritizing in Africa's agri-food systems with regards to fourth industrial revolution. And again, I will highlight a few of them which stand out for me. Issues of soil health and how we can apply for the and big data on-site reduction of waste. There was an idea about policy incentives to encourage foreign investors and locals to introduce for the industrial revolution technologies. There's one particularly that I have found most interesting is about how we can actually educate farmers so that we can increase yield, and how for the industrial revolution can help us with that, reducing the distance that food has to travel from farm to fork. That's also a very critical one. Issues of food storage, but also cost-effective connectivity in remote areas where we have most of us smallholder farmers. And finally, how the fourth industrial revolution can be used in addressing climate change. Again, just picking up a few of these issues that have been raised. Another question, second last question, we asked about how fourth industrial revolution can be used to enhance the health system. And so we asked you what could be our priority questions. I can see there was a suggestion on traditional medicine, drug manufacturing, disease preparedness, point of care or last mile health system. I did see a point on One Health, enabling policies, health insurance, e-health, but also how we integrate mHealth into the current system, and how policy analytics can actually influence decision making. So again, just picking up a few of the points that you have contributed to this conversation. And finally, we asked you what issues we may have missed in today's conversation. And I liked the one on capacity in One Health, science culture, which is something we rarely actually talk about from the science space, but science culture starts out there. But also there was this comment about migratory communities and the challenges they face in accessing important services, and how the fourth industrial revolution can help with that. And again, adult education was also proposed as something we may have missed in today's conversation. These responses, together with the conversations we have listened to and the questions that you have been posing, will enable us to start putting together these thoughts in identifying what research priorities are there for the continent, and we'll be able to continue with this conversation later on next month. I will hand over back to Wesley to help us tackle some of the questions which have been posed. Over to you, Wesley.
Thank you, Grace, for that. So we've had some great questions, incoming questions from you. And I'm going to enlist the help of our speakers tonight as well to tackle some of these questions. Hopefully I don't put you too much on the spot, but let us start with the first question, which maybe Professor Marwala can help us with. What should education, research and development institutions and private sector play in this seeking to benefit from 4IR in Africa? Prof. Marwala?
No, thank you very much. Yeah. No, I think you know, the fourth industrial revolution is supposed to be a thing that has to be tackled by all the forces in our society, whether they are the political forces, whether they are the social forces, whether they are the industrial forces. For example, it is quite clear that we need new forms of skills in order for us to be able to succeed in the fourth industrial age. And this new set of skills must be linked to production, to industry. Now, the question that we need to ask ourselves is, what role should each sector play? I think the educational institution must play a crucial role, but I think also industries must play a crucial role, because you have people who are already in industry who do not have many of these skills. You know, the concept of adult-based education for everybody. We tend to think in South Africa, when we think of adult-based education, we think of people who cannot read and write. I think now we are talking about people who are educated, but they are not technologically educated. How do you get them to that level? So it is absolutely very, very important. And then the second part is about resources. And when we were crafting the recommendation around artificial intelligence, National Artificial Intelligence Institute, we realized that it will require resources. And those resources include experts that university can be able to produce. It requires financial muscle that government and industry can be able to put into the institute, so that we are able to succeed. So in all these players are absolutely vital, and the coordination and synchronization of their investments is really, really very crucial. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Prof. Marwala, for that answer. Let's take another question. So Let's have a look at this one. So we have a question in terms of ecological impact. So how do we deal with ecological impact of our technologies that are changing ecosystems? I'd like to invite Prof. Eliane to maybe help us with this question.
Yes, okay. So in terms of, there are two sides to this. It's clear that the fourth industrial revolution requires a lot more energy, but at the same time, you know, if we just look at, if we do agriculture more efficiently, we can use a lot less land, we can use a lot less inputs, and we can actually increase biodiversity regeneration. So really, the fourth industrial revolution, as the keynote speaker said, is really key to achieving the SDGs. It's how do we use the fourth industrial revolution as a servant to ecological and planetary health. And that's really the focus we need to look at. And there are a lot of examples of how it can be done. I love the image of the wind turbine and the solar cell. So part of it is how do we use it really to serve the SDGs? So we have about 9 years now, 9.5 years less to achieve the SDGs. And we have to do everything we can so that data allows us to have more ecological production of everything. Our whole system has to become circular economy that serves nature regeneration. And all the elements show us that the more we have access to data and use it effectively to eliminate waste, and everything becomes a source to feed into regeneration, the more we're able to move forward and accelerate ecological regeneration and bring back biodiversity, which is really critical to ensure that we have no more pandemics. So it's all linked together. And this is where data and machine learning and AI can really help us, because it allows us to bring a lot of different data sets together to analyze. And it's really, what are the questions we're asking the fourth industrial revolution to solve? So this is why the issue of human capital is primary, because we have to decide what are the questions we want solved. And those questions will determine what the fourth industrial revolution will bring us. And it actually says the fifth industrial revolution is a green economy. And so the fourth industrial revolution has to take us to global green economies.
Thank you very much for that answer. Just a note before we get to the next questions, we'd like to apologize. We're running a little bit late. Please allow for possibly 15 to 20 minutes over the time. Let's get straight into into another question. In the face of multiple technologies and their interdependencies, and given limited capacity in national government departments, how can African countries design integrated national or regional strategies that address the needs of emerging technologies that are inclusive? Maybe I can start to tackle this one and get some help from Professor John Omar Mugabe. I think already we've discussed tying up priorities and looking at prioritization in terms of our goals. So Prof. Omar Mugabe, I think that linked up quite well with your presentation. Perhaps you'd want to give this a shot. Okay.
Ways of answering it. One is, and this, I hold some strong views on this, that countries should not necessarily wait to design strategies to engage with these technologies. For a range of reasons. One, the technologies just move faster than strategies in many cases. I think what one is to appreciate that the technologies are converging. Rapidly converging. us opportunity to focus specific technologies. So instead of focusing on robotics, I think we need to focus on the system industries. Will not be strategy, in my view. It will be a problem-oriented. So it's around 19. There will be one enables specific problem. The reasons why I'm making that was more quality and these were more so
I think your audio is breaking up a bit. Yeah, your audio is breaking up a bit. I think perhaps we can maybe just move to the next question rather quickly. Sorry for that. So maybe I can ask Prof. Aluini to help with this question. What are the required innovation ecosystem transitions for Africa to benefit from 4IR? Prof. Aluini?
Yes. So Gary, are you saying what kind of infrastructure? Can you repeat the question, please?
So the question is, what are the required innovation ecosystem transitions for Africa to benefit from 4IR? So I guess this is possibly could be answered in relation to infrastructure, for example.
Yeah. As I mentioned in my talk, I believe that really to fully benefit from the fourth industrial revolution, we need to be able to connect more people. We need to connect more devices, which means we need to kind of democratize broadband connectivity access. And to do that, maybe some, I would say, policy have to change. Spectrum regulation in some countries have to also be adapted to kind of this new kind of request. As I mentioned, I mean, in terms of innovation or like new kind of ways of connecting, relying on space, on the new generation of satellite communications that are going to be put, that will go online within a couple of years, should allow many countries to kind of bridge the digital divide. They would not have to invest a lot of money to put fiber right and left. They would just have to kind of acquire satellite equipment on the ground, create essentially islands of connected kind of villages or even within cities, improve connectivity, and as such, everything follows, in my view.
Thank you very much for that. We have a lot of really great questions that are coming through. Unfortunately, we don't have as much time to get through them, but hopefully we can take this discussion further and offline. So without any delay, I see Grace is prompting me as well. So we're going to get to our final slot, and before that, I'd like to thank the participants, all the participants and the panelists for this wonderful and very fruitful engagement. We hope that we would have more time, but we're running out. We've reached our final speaker, whom I have a pleasure of introducing, Professor Tom Karayuki, the Director of Programs at the African Academy of Sciences and leader of the Alliance for Accelerating Excellence in Science in Africa platform. Prof. Karayuki, over to you to address us on the way forward and give us your closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Wesley. Thank you, Grace, for the moderation. And let me start actually by thanking our very good speakers, Chilisi Marwara. Thank you very much. My good friend Eliana, all the way from Canada. Thank you very much. Thank you, John Mugambi. And thank you to Mohammed El Islim. Thank you very much for your contributions. It's been a very good meeting, and I want to thank the participants for their engagement. And we have seen questions, we have seen comments, and your inputs, and we are taking all of that. And I think between Wesley and Grace, we are compiling all the issues that we have had. It's been a great meeting actually this evening, despite the fact that you've been sitting patiently for the last 2 hours or so. But let me, in closing remarks, just make a few comments about what we think could be a way forward for us. But part of that actually is the fact that we're beginning by celebrating the fact that we are a continent that is full of the youthfulness and vitality. And we can then build the next phase and the fourth industrial revolution in Africa by focusing a lot on the youth of Africa. They will bring their intellectuality, they will bring the vitality, their energies, their collaborations to actually build the next phase and that revolution of fourth industrial that Africa requires. And therefore, we would expect and we want to see them getting into the robotics as outlined by our panelists this evening, artificial intelligence, 3D printing, Internet of Things, etc. And many of them are already venturing into that journey. Now, there are many questions that had been posed this evening, and I have a few of them myself. So, for example, I think one of the ones for me is how do we, accelerate this debate, this discussion moving forward? Because in Africa, there are some who could ask and pose questions to ask all of us whether we are getting too over ambitious. And the cynics might actually say, well, it's great to hear that we want to get into the fourth industrial revolution, but actually, are we not struggling to basic amenities, provision of clean water, provision of electricity, as Chilizi alluded to that, infrastructure, struggling to build our own infrastructure. If you go 60 years at the advent of our independence across many countries across the continent, the challenges of literacy, the challenges of disease, the challenges of poverty, 60 years on, we're still struggling to address those. But perhaps there is a real opportunity for us to then apply the industrial revolution, the fourth industrial revolution, to actually help us to leapfrog from all these issues of literacy and disease and poverty to get from, for example, fragile health systems, as we have continued to debate in the period of pandemic. We can see our leapfrogging from delivery of healthcare into genomic medicines and precision medicine and better engineering for biomedical or for climate sciences and for agriculture and food. These are all the things that we all look forward to. I like reading from some of the writings from historians and philosophers, for example, Yuval Noah Harari, who says that it is possible to move from literacy, disease, poverty, to actually thinking about immortality and happiness and bliss and the power as great as the gods, so to speak, quoting from him. But I think Chilizi has also said exactly the same thing, that actually the consequences for the fourth industrial revolution would take us into debates around inequality and freedom and ethics and democracy. And I think those are debates. So that's one of the points I wanted to make, is the need for us to continue as partners to think about more and more debates as we get into this new era that we want to build. The other thing to say is that for us at the African Academy of Sciences, and as we are continue to think about how we get into these partnerships and what we can lead and how we can collaborate, we actually are thinking, like was mentioned from the very beginning by colleague Isevani, we have these waves of priorities, and those priorities include moving from health to climate to data to food to vaccines to epidemics to schools and economics and infrastructure. All of these are priorities, and we must continue that. And we are all hoping that the fourth industrial revolution can help us address these challenges to meet our developmental goals. I think the last thing to say is that for us, over the last 3-4 years, we have made investments of close to $300 million for supporting research and development in Africa with the generous support of our funders and partners globally. Now, when I look at what we have been putting the resources available into, I am actually satisfied to see that part of that money has actually gone to young emerging leaders and researchers who are, for example, using artificial intelligence as one example, because they're working on things like how to deal with antimicrobial resistance. There's another group of about 10 projects and another 10 that is coming from the AES looking at drug discovery and actually using approaches like AI on how to do drug discovery. There is another team of more than 10 projects that we are supporting that are actually looking at data sciences. And I think now we are getting into that area where we want to see more and more of these young researchers that we can support moving forward. But I think the thing to emphasize is that the building blocks of how we get into the fourth industrial revolution is also going to be based on how we build our data journeys for all of us as partners and countries across the continent. At the level of the institution, we ourselves are actually just beginning these discussions internally about where will our data journey take us. Because you go in a journey through a number of areas. You go from where you are focusing internally as one step of your data journey. And then you get to where you say, yes, we are aware of our own journey and where we are with our program data and our data, how we use it, how we reuse it. Then you get to another step where you are collaborating across many synergies. Then you get to where you are exploring your data and you are now looking at data that is external, data that is new, data that is enriched, data that needs to be shared. Before now, you get to optimizing that data sciences and prediction and how you can then use that for various facets of economic, social, political. And finally, I think what we all want as part of the final journey, and this is something that we want to build together, is the completion of that data journey gets us to the transformation where we use, like Chirisi and the panelists have said, we use AI, we use new technologies to redeploy our assets and people, how we redefine and how we actually become part of new communities across the continent and across the globe. That would be my remarks on this, and to say a very big thank you to all of you for the share. And of course, there will be a lot more debates that we are going to facilitate as we move forward. Thank you, Wesley. Thank you, Grace.
Thank you very much, Tom. We truly appreciate you closing this meeting. Over to you, Isavani.
Great. Thank you very much, all of you, for your patience and staying with us. I'm sure you all agree it was worth it. The excellent keynote and presentations, but also thank you very much for participating in the Mentimeter. And thank you very much, Professor Tom Kamuriki, for your closing remarks to spur us on. And just to say that we will be contacting you. We realize this area is very much of interest, and we are planning another engagement with colleagues, and we look forward to inviting you to that. But also, if you can't participate, letting your colleagues know that we are having a second engagement on the fourth industrial revolution, and we really look forward to hosting you again. Thank you very much. And thank you very much to the team, Grace, Olivia, for, as always, very professionally and confidently arranging this. And thank you very much to the moderator, Wesley, and again to our speakers, Mohammed Slim Alwani, Prof. Tsaliti Marwala, Prof. John Mugabe, and Eliane. Thank you so much for your insightful presentations. We are very glad to have you join us. And again, goodbye and have a good Friday evening.
Goodbye, everyone. Thank you.
Goodbye. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.